Father Gumpel, first I'd like to thank you very, very much for giving us the time and describing your personal experience so that we can further clarify the papacy of Pope Pius XII in the eyes of the world. I wonder if you could possibly give us a brief history of your personal experience under the Nazi rule in Germany, because I think that's very, very significant.
Frankly, I'm not very eager to talk about this awful time. I have lived through the Nazi period. I was exiled twice so as to save my own life. Especially, I'm very sad, even now when I think about it, that I killed my good grandfather, with whom I'm in a very friendly relationship. I was destined to become his direct successor, and he took a very active hand in my instruction, formation, education, etc. Unfortunately, before the Second World War started, suddenly some people appeared at his villa, asked him to accompany them, and since then we don't know anything about him. The only thing that has ever came to light was one of his cufflinks, which was gold, with our coat of arms, and that's the only thing we have. We don't know where he was killed, how he was killed, where he is buried, nothing whatsoever. That is point one of the memories which I do not like to recall, as you can well understand. Secondly, a message that I got when I was between 14 and 15 years from my uncle, the brother of my mother, who told me, Peter, you are getting older now, you are not a small child any longer, and I can tell very frankly to you that a very serious thing has happened to your mother. So I said, what happened? He said, well, your mother went on a long walk, she had a very bad accident, and the thing is extremely serious. So I said, is she in hospital? He said, no, it's much worse. Then I asked, is she dead? He said, yes. And then he said, I'm leaving immediately. Try at least the permission to get her mortal remains home. So there you are. You are between 14 and 15 years. I knew why my mother had left Berlin. I knew that, because word had reached us that a house that my grandfather, a rather splendid kind of property, that my grandfather had donated to me, had been invaded by the Nazis and that had destroyed everything. So my mother wanted to go there so that when this terrible period of Hitler was over, she could put in a claim of reparation to the coming government. Unfortunately, the photographer whom she had approached denounced her to the Nazis. She was arrested, and then I got this message. Now, this is a thing from a psychological point of view. It may be difficult to understand. I just didn't believe what my uncle had told me. He was a trustworthy man, an engineer, therefore a cool-headed person. So I sat down and thought, well, what can I do about it? And then, thanks be to God, I got the idea. There is one general who once in my presence told my mother, he was a friend of the family, if there is ever any very serious crisis, get in touch with me. And I knew that he had left his telephone number. I knew that the telephone number had to be read backwards, and changing the ciphers, I knew how to do this. So I went to the street, because you couldn't use the telephone. Our telephone was supervised and listened into. So I went down to the street, called him, and thanks be to God, he was in his office. And I said, can I see you? And he said, yes. And he gave me a place where to went. I explained the situation to him, and he said, well, time is running short, because I understand the idea is your mother is not killed, but there is an order by Himmler himself and Hitler that she be shot, to be shot tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. I know this. And I said, well, can we do anything? I said, well, I speak to one of the most important military people who is the superior, another general, and we can see, can you call me at the same number you called just now? Can you call me in about an hour or so? I didn't, and he said, yes, go down on the street, because from up home you couldn't speak. So I went down, and he told me to meet this general in a very dark street at Berlin, in the middle of the night, after 12 o'clock, and in the hope that it would be a success. But he said, don't have too much hope. So I went there to a very dark street, and then this gentleman appeared in civilian clothes, not in his military uniform, of course, a hand drawn to a thing, black spectacles. Now, I had prepared what I wanted to say, but when I had this person in front of me, I forgot everything and just looked at him very strongly. And he said, General, You know exactly what is going to happen. Now I ask you, what are you and your colleagues doing? He took off his spectacles and looked at me. I don't think I'd ever been spoken to like this by a boy. And he said, you know, from your eyes there speaks the conscience of your nation. And he said, I do a very risking thing. Hitler goes always to sleep very late. I'm going to him and going to threaten him. And he did. However, I didn't know this. I went home at about 3 o'clock. The bell was going. There was an officer of the SS standing in front. My first reaction was, now, probably Hitler has been enraged that he found out that I did this, and now you're going to be killed as well. But it wasn't like that. They told me that Hitler had sent this person to get my mother back by plane, fly over, back her back, so that in the same day she would be back. And he said, well, out of human consideration, I'm telling you this, but if it ever comes out that I paid you a visit, I will have to pay for it. That's another kind of thing. Then later they killed a nephew of mine for the simple reason that he was a good Catholic and he didn't do what they asked him to do. He refused point blank to do a treacherous kind of thing, and they shot him for that, from the back. Another question, just to mention a few kinds of things. I was exiled myself twice. In 1934, the situation for my family became so dangerous. There were people assembling in front of a villa in Hanover and shouting. There were perquisitions of our places, etc., and things like that. So the situation became so dangerous that it was decided that I, being the future heir of the entire property, a huge concern, should be brought into safety. And I went to France for 2 years. Had the experience to attend lessons in the French school with a stream of words coming to you, and there you are, you don't know a single word, so you don't understand anything. This was my first exile, but then later on I could return to Berlin because we had been given the assurance they would not try to do anything against me, but how could you trust the word of a Hitler? So when the situation came back again in 1938 after other experiences of this kind, they sent me now for a definite period into Holland, where I went for my second exile.
When from your research, I'm interested in Eugenio Pacelli's personal experience with Jewish people, with his friends, for example. Can you tell me anything about his childhood, where he had Jewish friends? Or?
Oh yes, definitely yes. His very best friend was Jewish. A certain boy, adolescent if you wish, Guido Mendes, who later became a famous surgeon. He went to Israel because during the persecution of the Jews here, Pius XII, by now Pope, saw to it that he could leave to Switzerland, and from there he proceeded to Israel and became a famous surgeon and professor of medicine in Israel. These two were close friends. It was really the best friend of young Pacelli. They visited one another at their homes, and it has been said, with a certain amount of humor, that probably Pacelli is the only pope who ever took part in a kosher meal, because when he went to his friend, of course, he ate what these people were offering him, and Guido Mendes came to him. They had discussions, they exchanged books, and they were the very best friends. And when Pope Pius XII died in 1958, Guido Mendes went on record to recall his memories of his former classmate, and he said he was not only very friendly with me, he was friendly with all the other Jewish students of our class. Polite, as always, correct, and of course he said he was the very best student among all of us.
Do you have any examples, for example, while he was when he was apostolic nuncio in Germany, of his intervention to help save Jewish lives?
Well, certainly there are a few incidents. The first ones that come to mind is, for example, when he just had arrived at Berlin, he became very friendly with a Jewish conductor, Bruno Walter, and the reason was Pacelli loved music. And he played violin and played it very well. Of course, later he could never continue because he had no time for that. But in his younger years, he played a great deal of music, and he became friendly with this Jewish conductor, Bruno Walter, who at that time was directing the Royal Opera in Berlin. Now, it so happened that one of the people playing in the orchestra of Bruno Walter, also a Jewish gentleman by the name of Krybilovsky, was arrested for in an anti-Semitic movement. Bruno Walter did everything to free him, but he didn't succeed. So then he went to his friend, the apostolic nuncio Pacelli, who immediately took action, and the next morning the man was free. Here you have a typical example. Another example is the visit